Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I'm going to do today what I said I was going to do last segment, and I'm going to give you a list of all of the illnesses and chronic illnesses and conditions that we have covered, but I'm only going to make it short because I just want to make this kind of an overall review of what we have gone through. I think when you take the total amount of time that I've been discussing chronic illnesses, I think it may be well over a year. No, I haven't taken any dates down. I should date everything, and sometimes when I teach a class I do date it because it might be 6 months before I finish the class or something like that. But the reason I think it may be over a year is the fact that when we got to diabetes, I spent 7 months on diabetes. I did a whole lot of chronic illnesses before we got to diabetes. Diabetes took 7 months to complete. And then after that, I went through more chronic illnesses, and we're just kind of cleaning it up now. So it's been a long road. But I still think that it was a good thing to do because all of these illnesses that people have, some of them aren't that common, but you run into them. People do have them. You may have a chronic illness yourself, and it's lifelong, and it does affect your personality. It can affect the way that your brain functions. It can affect the way you feel, the way that your opinions are, how you feel about things. And so therefore, since the personality can be affected, I think it was well worth going into. So let me start with the illnesses. These are kind of thumbnail sketches of what we've gone through. The first one I'm going to mention is autism and Asperger's. Asperger's is high-level autism. It's on the autism scale. It's a spectrum illness. Some people have it a lot. Some people don't have it so much. So it is according to a spectrum. And in it, the brain does not make a connection with people, and communication is difficult. It usually originates in infancy, and I have kind of a theory about it. The first few months that a baby lives, they act perfectly normally, they grow perfectly normally. And then when they get to be toddlers, like age 2 or so, 2 or 3, they start to show the symptoms of autism, and they can regress into autism quite rapidly. And I know a lot of people have the feeling that the shots that we give, measles, mumps, all of that, all of these shots that help you prevent becoming ill, that's the cause of autism. But there's absolutely, and I want to emphasize this is absolutely no evidence to show that giving children shots for illnesses or to prevent illnesses causes autism. The hard data is just not there. I have a friend of mine who's a neuropsychologist, and he has done research on this, and he said the hard data just isn't there. But I think the reason people think that the shots will give autism is autism occurs naturally in the body at about the same age as you would be giving children shots, measles, mumps, whatever the shots. I think that there are 23 shots sometimes that kids get. Now, that's a lot, and I think it should be not given, quite so frequently, or it should be spread out because kids do get sick from the shots. But the shots themselves do not cause autism. But the brain is developing. Now, when you get a toddler, he's about 2 years old, he goes on a growth spurt. And for some reason, no one understands why, the autistic brain may have too many cells. When it starts to develop the neurons and the cells of the brain are developing and the brain is growing, and of course you have cells in the brain at birth, but then suddenly you get growth spurts and you get cells that are growing at the toddler age. If there are too many cells, they can't wire right, and that may be the real cause of a lot of autism. And I'm not thinking that it may be just one cause. There may be several causes of autism, of which that happens to be one. But if the brain has a lot of brain cells, you're going to find that the brain is heavier than most brains by several ounces. There are more cells in the brain than there need to be. The cells just keep growing. They can't wire right. And you can also notice that the head is larger. I had a friend of mine in my office once, and she brought in her toddler, 15 months or so, and I was amazed at how large his head was. Now, he wasn't hydrocephalic. It wasn't that he had a lot of fluid in his brain and his brain was huge, but he had a much larger than normal head. He didn't have any trouble balancing it, but he was, after that, when I saw that, I wondered, and a few months after that, he was diagnosed as autistic and he does not speak. So there are brain changes, and part of it could be due to the excessive cells in the brain, which make it larger, which makes it heavier, and it just doesn't function right. And if you look at the brain scans of autistic children, the brain structures are not the same as it is for normal children. There is a difference in the way the brain develops. There is a difference in the way that the brain grows. And there are different divisions. And people, some have it and they're very disabled with it. They can't do anything. I was in a doctor's office and somebody came in with their child and he was just kind of wailing and making noises. He couldn't speak, and they actually had him on kind of a leash so he wouldn't get away. He was autistic, and he would never be able to be normal because he had a very extensive case of autism. Now, what happens in autism, you have a lot of self-absorption. They can't think beyond themselves. They can't interact with society. They have repetitive behavior. They have language problems. I know some autistic children just walk in circles all around, just walk in circles. With Asperger's, it's autistic, but you have a high level of intelligence. People can function normally. They have some problems with social relations because that's inherent in the illness, but for the most part, they can hold jobs, they can teach, they can do whatever it is they want to do. There's no delay of learning things, no problems with self-help, that is, they can take care of themselves, and there's no delay in the way the person learns and the way that they grow. It's just a case of they do have a form of autism which makes it difficult for them to relate to people. Now, the next disorder will be Rett's disorder. It starts at about 5 months, and this is really difficult because what happens in Rett's is that the head slows down. It's growing normally, and then suddenly the brain starts slowing down in its growth, and what has been learned completely disappears, so that they go from being normal at about age 5 months, then suddenly they lose everything, all of the skills that they've learned in 5 months, like learning how to balance themselves, or learning how to crawl, or things that you would expect the 5-month-old to be able to do, they can no longer do. So they deteriorate with age. It's a very sad illness that some children have. It's called Rett's. It's spelled R-E-T-T-S. It's a syndrome. Then there is hydrocephalus, and that's when the cerebrospinal fluid, which is the fluid that goes from the spinal cord to the brain and back, there's a fluid there that goes back and forth. It gets trapped in the head, and the head becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. I worked in a school once for children who had some kind of retardation. So they all had retardation. And this child's head, she was hydrocephalus, she was huge. I mean, her head was huge, and she couldn't balance it, and she couldn't get any skills in sitting up or anything, and you'd have to hold her up, and you'd have to balance her head up if you wanted her to sit up, because she just couldn't do it. And she was just the sweetest kid. I really liked her, but I knew she wasn't going to live long, because they tried the shunt. Usually you put in a shunt, and it gets the circulation, going between the head and the spinal column, but those shunts aren't perfect. And with her, the shunt just didn't work. So it was just going to be a period of time before she was going to pass away. And of course, you have to realize, even when there's pressure on the brain gets injured, so some of the brain cells die. So there would be difficulty with brain functioning anyway, because it would be killing off some of the brain cells, and you would end up with some retardation. Now, the opposite of hydrocephalus is microcephalus, but that's not caused by the same kind of thing. This is when the head is small and kind of pointy, and the brain is small. For some reason, the brain does not develop, and the person is really always going to be retarded. The head is really unusually small. I've seen children like this. Their bodies grow, their heads don't. So they have this small, pointy head. It's not so obvious maybe when they're babies, but when they get older and their bodies get larger and their head doesn't, it's very, very obvious how small the head really is. It's congenital. And another thing is, of course, the Zika virus causes microcephaly in the last trimester of pregnancy. Now, the question is this. If a person catches Zika in the first and second trimester, what does it do to the brain? The heads will be normal size. It's only in the third trimester that the microcephaly enters in. But even though you have normal sized heads in the first and second trimester, if you have Zika, the baby's heads will be born normal size. But we don't know if the brain is able to function in a normal way. The head may be normal size, but the brain may still have damage and not be able to function normally. And I've heard more recently that there is some concern that people who have Zika virus, if not counting pregnancies, but they just have it, may have some nerve damage as a result of it, or some brain damage as a result of it. But I don't know the full scope of that. I haven't heard anything more about it. Now, we went into attention deficit disorder, ADD, and the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where the child gets really, really out of control. They can't focus their attention, they're distractible, they're fidgety, they're impulsive, they're constantly in motion. Some can't talk. It's a very, very difficult disease, and I would think in some of the symptoms might be a little similar to autism. I know some children that have symptoms like these, they have to make a decision, is a child autistic or are they ADHD or ADD? Some can't talk, the behavior is out of control, and the brain structures are different than they are in normal people. So this is a brain disorder. And here again, some children have it worse than others. If you have ADD, it doesn't go away. It continues into adulthood. And people can function with it. They may need to be medicated, but if they don't have it, an extensive case of it, they're still going to have it. And when they grow into adulthood, it was thought when they grow into adulthood that it would leave and their brains would be normal again. But what happens is that the symptoms may change, but you still have the illness. But you can function. You may need some medical help in terms of doing it, but you can function unless you are so severely disabled with it that you can't function. Now, going into dementia and Alzheimer's, it's a loss of cognitive function, but it doesn't mean that all people have Alzheimer's. Let's see, I want to go into, I think I mentioned that before. Let's go to Down syndrome. Down syndrome is a type of retardation. It's caused by too many chromosomes. Instead of having 46 chromosomes, the person has 47. Now, some people do not get seriously retarded. Some people do get very seriously retarded. So it's a type of retardation caused by the chromosome, so it's inherent. And there is a rule of thumb. If a child is retarded, not necessarily Downs, but if a child is retarded, the more retarded they are, the less likely that it's inherited. Mild retardation would mean that they could have congenital disorder, they could have inherited it somehow. Severe retardation, it's probably a problem in the development of the baby without the right chromosomes or some kind of brain damage. So the more retarded, the less likely that it was inherited. We talked about intelligence. And we went from retardation to genius and the differences between them. What is involved with IQ, excuse me, using numbers, verbal skills, memory, reasoning, perception, spatial relationship, and all are involved in intelligence. And when you take intelligence tests, there's usually an attempt to measure all of those functions, and then you are assigned a score for your intelligence, 100 being normal, and 180 being genius level, and going down the scale to about 70, it would be retardation, mild retardation from 70, and then below that you can get into moderate retardation, you can get into profound retardation. But we went through the scale of what retardation is. It is impaired intellectual functioning. Mild retardation would be from 50 to 70 IQ. That would be about, around the 70 IQ would be about a child who is like around 7 years old. Moderate retardation would be 35 to 49. Severe retardation would be 20 to 34 IQ. And then you have profound retardation that would be below 20 IQ. There was a family that lived across from us, and they had a boy that was profoundly retarded. And he couldn't talk. He walked a little bit, but he couldn't talk. And he loved music. He would come on our porch and he would stand there, and my father, who was a brilliant musician, used to spend hours practicing. He studied at the New England Conservatory of Music, and he would stand on the porch and he would rock back and forth listening to my father practice. And they would come over after him and we would say, no, you don't have to do that. You know, he's okay. And he was okay. He just loved to listen to music, and he would rock back and forth. Once in a while, they would have him out to try to play with him, to throw a ball, and he would have a bat. Supposedly, he was going to bat the ball that they threw to him, like kids do, you know, like baseball people do. And he would stand there with his bat like this, and they would try to throw the ball to hit the bat because he couldn't think quick enough, and the ball would roll up the street, and then he would recognize that the ball had passed him. Then he would turn around and try to get the ball. But the thing is, he was so slow in his mental thought processes that he would stand and wait for the ball. He knew it was coming. It would go past him by several feet before he recognized the fact and put together in his mind that the ball had been thrown. Then he goes up and he tries to get the ball. So that can go on for hours. So profound retardation, and it is impairment of mental functioning. Now, the next would be Tourette's syndrome. Tourette's is a tic disorder. And the people who have tics, they may be vocal or they may be movement. If they're vocal, they make all kinds of sounds from their mouth that don't make sense. They can make sounds that sound like barking, yelping. They use sometimes obscenities. They can't stop it. They have no control over what comes out of their mouth. And they move. People who have tics, they'll move their arms or their legs, or they'll jerk, and it's just a very odd thing to see. Now, I know that some of them have normal intelligence, so it's not a case of an intellectual dysfunction. They may have normal intelligence, but they can't stop the jerking, the yelling, the making noise, and you suddenly hear them. They're yelling, they're barking, or what sounds like barks, and that's what it is. It's Tourette's. There has been a progress in terms of a device that you attach to yourself, a little device, and it produces an electrical current that goes in the body, and it seems to stop a lot of those tics so that the person isn't yelping or screaming or yelling obscenities or jerking around, you know, and so it helps them to control their behavior. Unfortunately, this is something that's long-lasting. The person is born with it, and it's long-lasting, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It can include violence, and the brain cells do not fire correctly. Now, we just have a few minutes left, so I think what I'm going to do is stop it here and continue this next time. We have a number of them to go, and I just want to make some comments about each one that I think is important to remember should you or a loved one of yours have these conditions. Once again, I want to say, do not blame yourself. If you have a condition like that, it's not your fault. Do not accept any guilt from somebody else, because it's not your fault. It's beyond your being able to stop it, and it just happens, and it's very unfortunate. Fortunately, most of these conditions can be treated, and or the symptoms can be managed, so you can live a pretty normal life. You just have to realize that your life is going to be somewhat different, but it doesn't mean that it's of less worth. It doesn't mean that you are of less worth. So I'm going to close it here, and I'll continue with this next time until we get this portion completed. Please join me then.